What's up, everybody? We are live with another webinar in the Quadrant series. And today I'm actually super excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, account-based marketing. And maybe my own reflection is that I was on stage talking about this 5-6 years ago, first time. And at that point, it was a more theoretical concept, right? I think a lot of us had heard about it. We've kind of done our own experiments, started doing it a little bit, but most never really dipped their toes. Now, fast forward another 5-6 years, and we have a completely different situation. A lot more companies have actually started adopting account-based marketing. We've gotten a lot of very specific learnings. We've kind of approached the topic in a new way. So I think we have quite a lot of insights to share on the topic, quite a lot of things we want to talk about. And today we really want to get super specific beyond kind of the theory of account-based marketing and actually dive into a handful of super specific cases that I think could be helpful if you're building your own account-based marketing program in your company. So let's talk about it. If we take account-based marketing's general fundamental premise, it sounds amazing, right? Okay, I can use the power of marketing here to help my sales win and grow the biggest accounts, the one we celebrate when we close the deal and so on. That sounds amazing. What could possibly go wrong here? And of course, it turns out many things can go wrong. A lot of companies get caught in poor collaboration between marketing and sales, or they spend a lot of time on technology and kind of getting a setup right before they get any learnings and actually get results, which I think has also soured a lot of people a bit on account-based marketing and kind of, hey, isn't that just what we've always been doing in marketing, targeting specific accounts and so on. So that's at least my goal for today, is that we help you get over some of these hurdles, because yes, the core premise is an absolute winner. So we have to do something about it. Myself, I'm Brian. I'm a partner here at Quadrant and spent the last 20 years or so as a massive marketing, sales, and digital nerd in various positions. And in my previous job, I also started an account-based marketing department, so have had quite a bit of experience with it. And today, the agenda is quite simple, right? We're going to start with a very short unpacking of account-based marketing. Some of the stuff, if you've been to other ABM events, you might have heard before, but I actually think this part is super important because, I say ABM, I think one thing, you might say ABM and think a completely different thing. So kind of unpacking our perspective on account-based marketing, I think is actually quite helpful. And then we're going to quite quickly jump into 5 cases from our own work and marry them to 5 tips that I think can help you get results and get started with account-based marketing. And then we're going to wrap it up with a few thoughts on how to get started. So let's jump in. And the beauty of account-based marketing is really its simplicity. The idea is so simple, it can be explained in these 3 lines. You start with one account, you treat that one account as one market, and then you make one joint sales and marketing plan. Not unlike you would do if you had to enter a new geographical market. Okay, so we need to get into France. That's one market. Let me gather some insights. Let's make a plan together and then let's go execute. And I think the reality is that that's a beautifully simple concept that's been sometimes twisted a bit by various people, including technology vendors, that try to make it about all kinds of other things, quite frankly. But again, the fundamental idea is quite simple. And then I think the first thing to keep in mind is that this absolutely isn't for everyone. If you don't have large deal sizes, few accounts that really matter, that are complex in the way they buy and take a long time to get through the process, and it's hard to get hold of those stakeholders, if you're not in that situation, then frankly, it might not be for you. It isn't absolutely for everyone. So this idea that all B2B should be account-based I don't necessarily buy that. And if you've, again, read or attended events on ABM, you will often hear the analogy of the spear and the fishing net, kind of with the idea that old marketing worked like a fishing net, right? You cast it out and you get a lot of different fish. Some you might be really interested in, some you might not. And then ABM is spearfishing, right? Where you really go after one specific big, hopefully, fish. And it's a good analogy in two ways. One, because that's actually quite true, but it's also, you could say, indicative of, let's say, sometimes the problem with ABM is because you are going after one, or let's say a handful or 10 specific big fish, and you're not going to catch anything else. And you do catch a lot more fish with a fishing net. So just be mindful of that, right? Is this really the right go-to-market motion for us to be so focused on few accounts, or are we actually better off with the fishing net? But if you do have these 5 characteristics, or most of them, then I do think account-based marketing is worth exploring. And another classic is, of course, we can do it on many different levels. The outset of ABM was that true one-to-one motion, where marketing and sales comes together and creates one plan for one account. And then I think, practically speaking, a lot of companies have found that sometimes it makes sense to bundle 5 or 10 together. And then some people have also kind of argued, hey, maybe we actually need hundreds in a true one-to-many. And you could argue, is that even ABM, if all you're doing is uploading a list to LinkedIn? So we're not going to talk too much about that last one-to-many piece. We're really going to stick with the first 2 here. So that true one-to-one ABM motion, where you do a plan jointly, sales and marketing, around one account, or the alternative where you add a few extra accounts, typically around a vertical, or find accounts that are otherwise similar, have the same pains, value drivers, etc. All right, so the way we go about it is actually starting with a game board, right? Because you could do a lot of things with ABM. Again, you could do one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many, and you can also target in many places in the buying cycle. Because again, if you are a large global account, you will typically be at different stages. You might not be buying today, so you'll be an acquisition account. You might be an account that we know is going to do a bid or a tender, RFP, one of those kinds of things in the short term. We need to prepare for that because that's a lot of money on the line. Or you might be an existing account that we need to grow or retain or prevent from churning. And I think that's one helpful view of trying to say, what are we actually trying to achieve here? What's ABM going to do for us? For some people, that might be help on bids and tenders for the very biggest accounts. It might help grow, let's say, the top 10 accounts, so they keep being the top 10 accounts, or other things. And again, that's where it's all up to you. But having that overview and being clear about, what do I want ABM to do for me? That's important. And then I think you can talk a lot about selection criteria and which accounts are right, and numbers and so on. But I actually think there's a much simpler, let's say, lens of looking at it, right? Where the number one thing is, can marketing make a difference? That's the most important thing. And the second thing is, can we actually engage with the key account managers, right? Are they actually interested in playing along with us? And I'm hearing from the wonderful chat that my lovely camera is broken. So I'm actually just going to go and fix that while I talk. You just imagine something very cool happening at the same time. Here we go. Boom. Totally, completely smooth. Nobody noticed a thing. And we're back. So that's the 2 selection criteria I feel like are the most important thing. And I can see in the chat now, if it works, or if it doesn't work, give me another hint and I'll go and fix it again. All right, So keep those two in mind. Don't necessarily get too lost in complicated numbers or calculations, right? Number one, can we make a difference? For example, if there's a big public tender that we're not even allowed to influence, or might be very difficult to, maybe ABM is not right. And again, if we have uncooperative account managers, then it doesn't matter at all. And then I think my final perspective before we dive into the cases is something about where does this help marketing go? Because we think many B2B marketing teams are on a journey from, what you would sometimes call the balloons or the coloring in events department to marketing being a more strategic driver of growth in the company. And for sure, ABM is part of that journey, right? Of having capabilities internally that can match against sales, dedicate time to work on specific deals and accounts, and get closer to the business. That's definitely one of the, let's say, hidden benefits from ABM, is that it helps marketing become more revenue focused. And of course, it only works if it's a team sport, right? Otherwise, if it's something marketing is doing over in the corner and have gotten some lists from sales and then just runs, it makes no sense. And I think this is the true power and benefit of ABM, is that it allows the teams to come together with shared goals, visions, and plans, and actually working together. So I think it can actually be a quite transformative thing if it's a new normal way of working in the company. All right, that was my brief introduction to our perspective on ABM. Let's dive into the meat of this presentation, which is the 5 cases and 5 specific tips to get ABM going. And I think we're going to start with something I'm quite passionate about. It's a bit of a meta tip in a way, and that is marketing-driven planning. So how is that a tip and how does that make sense? Well, I think, to be frank, one pitfall in ABM is that marketing shows up to a sales meeting or books a one-to-one with a key account manager and asks, what should we do? What do we want to do? And I think fundamentally this gets the, let's say, the relationship off to a bad start right from the get-go, right? Because you're assuming that whoever owns the account and owns the relationship both understands current state, knows the account, and then also knows exactly what marketing and ABM specifically can do for him or her. And I think that's, to be frank, often a fallacy. And I think it also sells marketing short, and marketing ends up again producing some sales materials or trying to make an event that the person can invite someone to, etc. You know the deal. And I think my only reflection on this is back to the original thinking: one account, one market, one joint plan. And again, if you had to make a proper market plan, you would of course start with, let's understand this, right? That's where the salesperson is truly crucial, because he or she can give that insight into who buys and who influences the sale or the purchase of a particular product. How do they buy? Is it decentralized buying where everyone does a little bit of buying, or is it heavily centralized and involves procurement and long processes and so on? That really matters, right, when it comes to how we're going to activate. And also, of course, what drives buying? Are we trying to de-risk? Is it an innovative new solution we want to onboard? Whatever the value driver might be. And I think this is the part where, as a marketeer, you ask the right questions, you're curious, you're trying to understand the account just as if it was a market. And then you do a common diagnosis, right? We say, why are we actually doing this? What do we want to achieve? Do we want to establish new contacts for our key account manager? Do we want to win a particular bid? And what does success look like here? Is it getting more meetings? Is it winning a tender? Why are we actually doing this? So again, joint goals. And then the treatment, right? Where this is where marketing actually takes the reins and say, aha, based on all of the things you've told me and the things we've agreed together, I think we should gather these insights because those are important to drive the rest of the process. We should do this messaging because that's what I hear matches what we're doing overall with where the account is. And we should do this list of activities. So let me show you how that kind of process turns into a few super simple, slides and templates that a few of our customers use. One of them being a global equipment manufacturer that sells to some of the biggest manufacturers in the world. So that could be, in this case, for example, Volkswagen. So Volkswagen is their one-to-one ABM example. And again, that started out with, let's understand the account. Who's leading it? What's our revenue goals on this account? What's the focus areas within Volkswagen? Of course, Volkswagen is a massive corporation with a lot of sub-brands. And then the account-specific insights. How does this account buy? And again, if we don't understand that, how are we ever going to do account-based marketing? Understand our major opportunity spaces. So exactly where in this account are we lacking contacts or awareness or influence? And what's our joint value proposition? And those things turn into goals that we align on. And I think in reality, if we're not able to do something like this, and again, this is a real case from a company targeting Volkswagen, then we probably shouldn't do ABM, right? If we don't know how the account buys, if we can't create shared goals, we also can't create what comes next, which is of course marketing coming back and saying, that sounds great. If that's what we want to achieve, I propose this activation plan. A mix of digital, physical, LinkedIn, social selling, a lot of different activities. But again, if we park that for a second, I think the other thing is the most important point here is actually marketing owning the activation plan, but building it on those shared insights and goals they had together. So that's my tip number one. Try to do a bit more marketing-driven planning. Don't expect the salesperson to come up with 10 activities on his or her own, but really drive that process from a marketing perspective, just like you would in any other situation. My tip number two is leaning into sales outreach. So again, if we thought of an account as a market, we would have a lot of different sales motions going. But what typically happens in very large accounts is that they are owned by a key account manager, typically one of the most well-paid, best compensated, most experienced salespeople you can find in the organization. They typically own, drive, retain the biggest accounts, which is great because that's often where they really shine. And then where they drop the ball is on all of the, let's say, lower level sales tasks that they've kind of been accustomed to not doing, which is often things like prospecting, constant prospecting in the account, and doing outreach. So again, if we think about a massive account like Volkswagen, you can never stop prospecting or doing outreach in that account, because in reality, there could be thousands of people that are interested in building dialogues and sales meeting with. And again, if I'm a super experienced key account manager, I hate doing prospecting and outreach because I'm super well compensated, I do the big deals, etc. So this whole aspect of constant prospecting, constant outreach to build network in the account gets kind of dropped in the middle, because we know the key account manager is super focused on existing relationships, existing deals, his existing network, while marketing is off in the side, providing air cover, doing inbound activities, and so on. So what happens to that early stage prospecting and influencing? Something you would include in every market plan. Again, if we were entering France, we would probably both have some key account management going after big deals and some inside sales efforts doing prospecting, for example. So I think what we've seen many times is that there's quite a lot of value in ABM adding an outreach component. So that means somebody in the team doing one-to-one outreach to hundreds of relevant people in the account, connecting with them on LinkedIn, writing to them, booking meetings, and so on. And again, if we take the example before of the industrial manufacturer, this is actually something that they're doing quite programmatically now, right? So for all of the big accounts that they want to target, some examples on the screen here, they have a specific ABM-driven outreach mechanism. And of course, key account managers love this, right? Because they don't have the time to do this, but they get the outcomes from it. They get new meetings from relevant people from within their account. And frankly, this is in many ways quite basic stuff, finding, researching, who should I talk to, crafting a personalized message to those people, connecting with them, writing to them, all the normal outreach motion, but it just gets dropped all the time. And we think it's a crucial part of many ABM motions for very big accounts, because this is really where you harvest all of the stuff you've sown in marketing over the years. So that's our second tip. Definitely don't drop the ball on outreach. Our third tip is really around account-specific content. So of course, in most organizations, there's lots and lots of content, right? We're not lacking necessarily content. But if we then go to a one-to-one or one-to-few motion, typically, is that content really good enough? Does it really address the buyer pains? Does it really help the buyer buy? And I think that's where we see the need for something a bit more account-specific. So again, the way we would frame great content in this space is that, is it actually good enough to be shown at a sales meeting? Is this something the key account manager would send as part of an introduction? Is it something they would actually go on a meeting and present? That's when you know it's good enough to be part of a sales conversation. It's probably good enough to be part of a marketing push as well. And of course, that has a lot of expectations connected to it, that it's got to be specific to the pains of the buyer. It's got to actually help the buyer get forward in the buying motion. And it also has to drive the buyer to do things in a different way, to act or to do a joint planning session, whatever, together with the seller. For us, that's kind of the gold standard of account-specific content, that it's so good that it can be part of a sales process as well, because it's specific enough to that buyer's situation. That sounds good, but let me give you an example from another of our customers, a Danish telco. And in this sense, it was about contact centers, and it was all about AI. So what we did here was, together with the customer, develop a AI guide to the contact center. And this was so specific that it actually went through the process of a typical call. So for example, handling calls, routing calls, fixing the problem, doing follow-up, all of those things that would be part of a big contact center's, let's say, processes, and then provided AI solutions for each of them. And the content was actually so strong that, again, it was used by a lot of sellers in one-to-one engagements and served as the foundation of, here's the opportunities we can work on together, because all of those processes map to something we can help the customer do. So again, we're blurring the lines between marketing and sales content to make it so good and so specific that it can be inserted into a sales conversation and help move that forward. The fourth tip is making the key accounts mini marketeers. This is actually an old concept from solution selling, so it would be familiar to some key account managers who've done that particular type of sales methodology. But we actually think that nowhere is this more important than when you do account-based marketing. And the reason why is, like any good salesperson would tell you, that personal relationships are really important. And of course they are. If you have a key account that's been buying for 10, 15 years, and they know the account manager and they do really well together, etc., 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 you know the story, they really believe in the power of the personal relationship. And of course, as do we. It's super important. But the thing we should ask ourselves isn't, okay, that's great, now you go do that. The real question is, how do we then take that idea and supercharge that? How do we take your one-to-one relationships and turn those into one-to-many relationships? Turn the key account manager into a mini marketeer. And of course, here we are talking about concepts like social selling, etc., where the actual account manager becomes the face of something broader, becomes a trusted person, a thought leader, an advisor that you would contact not just for, let's say, actual deal information, but also on more consultative aspects. So let me give you a few examples of that. I think my only reflection on this is that in the ideal world, and when we look at the greatest account managers out there, they kind of do this on their own, but the vast majority need a little help from marketing, frankly, to really do this. So one example that we worked on is for an enterprise software company, and you are looking at Samuel, their UK sales director. And for him, he is a salesperson, yes, but he also needs to be an advisor. He needs to be someone the customer can trust, that the customer knows has insights into the industry at large and the solutions he's trying to sell to become trusted. And one of the ways we're trying to do that is through social selling on LinkedIn, where our friend Samuel here has some smart takes on some of the key industry pains and so on. And as you can see, we're not necessarily doing a super expensive photo shoot in a lovely location in South Africa with 5 cameras. He's just doing this at home, but it's super authentic. You get a connection to Samuel, and he's talking about nerdy stuff like interoperability in the insurance sector. So we know he knows his stuff. And social selling is one way of doing this, but I think there's lots of ways to activate account directors on mini roundtables, writing articles on their behalf, promoting them through webinars, etc., etc. But again, accepting the fact that buyers buy from both a brand and from human beings, and trying to turn up the volume on the human aspect, we think is super powerful, should be a part of many, many, many ABM motions. That was the 4th recommendation, really to include the enterprise key account manager as part of the ABM mix. The 5th tip and the 5th case I'm going to show today is around big ticket tenders. And I think a lot of B2B companies, of course, are involved in large tenders, RFPs, RFQs, whatever we call them, bids, etc., where a lot of money is on the line around a very specific deal. And quite often, this is an area that marketing stays completely out of. It's a bit sensitive, and it's typically a very intense process run by experts on the matter. But to be honest, we also think it's a big opportunity for marketing to lean into. And I would claim that in your company, if you're doing tenders over, let's say, 10 million DKK in value, you actually need a pretty good story for why you shouldn't do this. Like, let's say a lot of companies we work with are doing tenders that are 100 million DKK in value, for example. And winning or losing that particular tender is incredibly important to the company. So why wouldn't you throw absolutely everything you can at winning that tender, including marketing and account-based marketing in particular? So typical ways ABM and marketing can help on tenders could be ways like really reaching, let's say, the hidden stakeholders. Because typically we see a buying group that consists of a lot of people. Some of them are very well known to the key account manager. Could be the project lead, could be procurement that he or she needs to deal with directly, could be a tech person, etc., etc. And then a large unknown, frankly, buying group that influences the purchase, that can say yes or no. That can be something like the board or the C-level that isn't actually engaged with the vendor, but has the power to approve or disapprove that. And again, if you're a brand that's not very well known, or you're trying to get into a new piece of business, then they can be real stoppers if they don't know who you are. So again, that's where we think marketing has a role of reaching all of these people, influencing them, positioning the company in the right way in relation to that specific bid. 3 quick ways that can happen and where marketing can do something in a bid. 1, getting insights. So of course, a tender and a consultative proposal in general can be a general one where, okay, here's our solution, or it can be something that's tailored to the customer, where we've perhaps gone and gathered some insight, asked the customers of the customer or whatever about their solution and try to make the tender more relevant. It can also just be this coverage or air cover that we talked about before, where we reach more buyers in the buying committee through LinkedIn or other platforms or direct marketing even to influence their purchase. Or it could be the specific material and experience we provide in the bid. And quite frankly, a lot of bid tender deal material isn't very amazing. It's on average actually quite poor, because all the orientation of a bid and sales team goes towards answering all the required questions, which there can typically be hundreds of. So again, I think marketing has a role in saying, how do we turn this tender where there's a bunch of things we have to do to also be a great experience for the customer, to look amazing, to embrace the customer's look and feel, to integrate the customer's vision with your vision, develop a joint vision, all of these things that marketing with a strong value proposition can help do. So again, depends a bit on the tender. What role can ABM and marketing play? But we think it's incredibly important to be curious about this and lean into it. One example I've brought along here is from Jabra, who presented this at one of our previous events here, which is an example from a tender situation where they are bidding on a very large project. And to be quite honest, normally those tenders would be in a Word document and with some prices and an Excel sheet. But instead, they turned it into a very consultative proposal where they, one, embrace the customer's visuals, but they also have done some insights and some research to both, expose what are the challenges for this particular customer, what did that lead to in terms of considerations for us, and what's the business case we think you can take to your management and your board to get this project through. And again, this is all about helping the buyer get their buying done through both, you could say, top-down arguments of where's the company going and so on, but also bottom-up arguments. Like, what's the ROI of this? What's a good way to think about a business case? The project was won, and it was a multi-million-dollar project. And again, massive value from ABM, and of course also a lot of other actors in the space, and a very concrete way that ABM can help move a tender forward. So that was the last of my 5 mini cases and tips here. I think the last thing I want to get across here is that these are all very different things, right? Leaning into a different way of doing planning, doing sales outreach, you could say. Is that even marketing? Leaning into content, emboldening and empowering key account managers, and going all the way into a specific bid and the material that goes in front of the customer in a meeting. And for me, this just shows that ABM is all about the specifics. There's no one-size-fits-all plan here. It's all about, again, having a strong planning of understanding the customer and how they buy, making activities that match that. Okay, I'm going to end up with the final section here, which is super short, which is just 3 things to think about when you're getting started. And the first one is actually something that is, again, a bit of a meta recommendation, which is just taking the time to develop a simple framework and process so you don't start over all the time. I think this especially applies to global companies where there might be a lot of marketeers in the field that all have to do ABM. And if we're all reinventing the wheel every time, I think we're missing out on an opportunity. So having just simple templates of like in this case from KMD, of what do we want to achieve, and two, what are some common activations and tactics that we want to apply. I think this is a super helpful, and I think also quite, let's say, I think this is something that also sales see a lot of value in, that, okay, I'm not starting from scratch. I kind of have these 10 or 12 menu items of things that probably can help you. And of course, we want to do a specific plan, but we don't have to start from scratch. That's my first tip. Doesn't have to take a long time. It's a super helpful exercise to get done. My second recommendation would be to pilot it. And I think there's only really one recommendation here, which is to start with a so-called coalition of the willing. And that is account owners that are already 100% excited about this opportunity. Because if we're trying to do something new, and there's a little bit of resistance, and you shouldn't get involved in my account, and so on, and quite frankly, it's going to fail. So really committing to those accounts owners, those people, those specific 2 or 3 people, they make all the difference in the world when starting to do ABM and wanting to prove the value of ABM, because you're going to rely on them every week to give insights, do activities, and so on. And if they're not interested in or committed in doing that, you're just going to have a hard time. Final tip here is kind of a don't get lost type of tip. So while the other things are very do this is more of a don't do that type of recommendation. And I think there are 2 very common pitfalls. One is the tech pitfall. And I think, quite frankly, there's been a lot of enterprise SaaS companies with maybe a little bit too much venture capital money that's tried to define what is ABM and said, okay, if you want to do ABM, you need an expensive technology solution for them. And I just think, again, I found this yesterday, a blog saying the 42 best account-based marketing tools. For me, that in itself is insanity, right? Most ABM teams should get started with the basic things they already have. LinkedIn, marketing automation, whatever they have, their website, all of those super, super specific things that they can already do and can already do account targeting with. Don't get started with a super expensive tech implementation that you need to integrate to CRM, etc., etc. Start with something simple you can do with what you have. And then the second pitfall to not get lost in here is measurement. And of course, the dilemma here is that we've never had more data, which is fantastic. Right? We can go and look at how many clicks account X had with this ad from the other day in this campaign, and how many of those were in the Netherlands versus Denmark, blah, blah, blah. And in a way that could be interesting, I guess, but in the real world, what we should all be interested in is, are we reaching the goals the account as a whole has? Because exactly with these big enterprise accounts, what activity cost what and so on is a massive time sink, and can be worth it if you are a really enormous marketing organization maybe, but most people should just marry ABM to the generic account targets. So whether that's win the tender, develop more contacts, get 5 new opportunities this quarter, or whatever, those are the targets you should be oriented against. And you shouldn't be arguing, did sales do this, does marketing do that? Forget about it. Did we reach the goals of the account? If we did that, ABM is a success, and we should do more of it. That was my last, you could say, recommendation for getting started. And I think we're actually on time to do a little bit of Q&A. So if you are, as I can see, quite a lot of people online in the webinar, shoot a message, and I'll try to punch it back. I can see here one question, which is, hey, thank you for such a thorough and in-depth presentation. Very informative. What are some tactics I can get started with easily? And thank you. And I think easy tactics for me are, number 1, anything LinkedIn related. Like, let's not make it too complicated. LinkedIn is the easiest way to do account targeting anywhere. So that could either be the paid aspect of LinkedIn or the more organic aspect, like with our friendly UK salesman that we saw earlier. So I think that's a super simple way to get started. I think also anything related to stuff that's already in your CRM can also be an easy way to get started. Like you might already have, like the example with Volkswagen, you might already have 100 people in Volkswagen in your CRM. Maybe that's a good way to get started as well with something that influences the account. But definitely those digital channels are often the easiest way to get started. Not that it should end there, but that's a good, you could say, tactic to get off the ground. And now we're doing something. I hope that makes sense. There's another question here. Will you provide budget insight to an outreach setup? I can see they managed to book quite some meetings with their top 5 accounts. Can you shoot me a message? I'm very happy to share the budget of that, but I think maybe in a less public forum, I think would be meaningful. I think it of course depends on the account and how hard the buyers are to reach, quite frankly. If you're trying to book meetings with, let's call it CFOs, for example, you're gonna look at a low rate and a very high cost per meeting. This particular example with the industrial manufacturer here, we're trying to book meetings with a lower level, right? Heads of engineering and so on. And that's actually not that expensive. I think it would be less expensive than you expect, I would bet. So sorry, not the public pricing, but shoot me a message. I'll give you a specific price on it. What would you do if you meet resistance from sales due to time investment, etc.? It's a fantastic question. I think a lot of sales leaders will also ask, how much time are they going to use on it? And they're going to use time for sure, right? There is no free lunch here. ABM without time invested from the seller is just a waste. Just don't do it, right? So again, if you get a lot of resistance here, I would honestly just not do it, right? Because it's going to be a disappointing project. It's going to be a disappointing pilot for you. So if you have a lot of resistance, don't do it, right? Because that signals that they don't believe in it, right? And if their heart's not in it, if they don't truly believe marketing can make a difference on this account, then don't, right? I think that's the main piece of advice, I think. Let's see if we maybe have a couple more. Do you have a base set of metrics that should be used to track progress toward the account goals to avoid getting lost in measurements? I think that's a really good question. I think we typically have, you can go at this in 2 ways. You can go at it in the metrics way of measuring, leads and opportunities and and you can go at it in the, let's say, more conversational way, which is, I think, sometimes more helpful with the account manager. So base set of metrics is easy. What's the pipeline, right? That's the most simple way. It leans directly into what sales should already be looking at. What's my account-specific pipeline? Okay, that's good. And then the other way is actually thinking about a few super simple things. Number 1, how well connected are we? That means, do we know the right people? How present are we? Like, are we top of mind? How informed is the buyer that they can actually buy from us? How valuable are we perceived at? And how well positioned are we? Are we positioned as a good candidate to invite? And I'm showing an example also from earlier in the presentation that you can steal from that. And it's a conversational tool we use for sales performance management as well. When we're trying to think about an account, you can think about those 5 things as kind of a thought starter. So it's either that, more qualitative evaluation, or just do the pipeline. Don't overcomplicate it. And one more question here is, how do you prove the value of ABM? And I think back to actually what we just talked about, I think this is about doing a few pilots, getting good feedback, hopefully from salespeople, having that mix of a qualitative feedback and saying, okay, this actually helped lift the conversation or it helped me get into places I haven't been before. And then hopefully there's a quantitative aspect as well, where we say, if we look at the accounts that we've done ABM for, how much have they grown? and compare it to accounts we haven't done ABM for. How have they grown? That can also be a way, very top-down way of proving the value. But I think short-term, it's all about the key account managers. Do they find this helpful? Have they found it helpful to get into new sales conversations and so on? And or otherwise, in general, you get into the generic, as we call it, proof and belief problem in marketing, where it does require a little bit of belief to get started. And I think, frankly, sometimes I'm a little bit confused or angry with this, right? Because does it make sense to do marketing towards our most valuable accounts and our biggest tenders, and where we're going to make most of our revenue? Yes, it does. Right? And if that needs like an immense amount of proof, then to be frank, you're having the wrong conversation, right? Any other questions here? Yes. Can I read more about ABM somewhere on your website or LinkedIn? You can read a lot of things in both places, let me guarantee you that. And I think what I will hopefully share, if you write just a quick note to me, is that we actually have an upcoming ABM guide, which is a more practical white paper style guide coming out. And then there's a few books I will recommend as well. So if you just shoot me a message, I'll send those over. All right. Any other final questions here? I think we are nearing time here. I think if not, then let's see. There's actually one right before I'm about to say goodbye. Are you seeing any movement to the approach of working with buying groups in the context of ABM in your experience? Absolutely, right? Absolutely, right? I think, frankly speaking, it's been a topic for years now. Like, hey, you're not selling to individuals, you're selling to groups. And I think that has landed, in a lot of enterprise, also sales organizations, also because of the adoption of different, for example, qualification frameworks like martech and so on, where you specifically have to write out who are the different people with different roles in the buying groups. So I think that idea has definitely landed in many, many teams. And I think ABM is a way to even accelerate that, right? Back to, let's say, the planning example, right? How does buying happen? Like in that context, you have to tease out, it's a group, it's this group, it's these people typically, etc., etc. So for sure, I think there's a lot of movement here, and I think it's not new news to most sales teams that buying happens in groups. I think that's quite well established. All right, I'm gonna make a wager that was the last question, and you're welcome to shoot me a message either on mail or LinkedIn if you have any more questions or anything you'd like to know or get insights with. Otherwise, just want to say thank you for spending the time with me today, and I hope you have a fantastic day out there.